All right, guys, hello and welcome. We're gonna go ahead and give this a try. Doing a little video chat through one of these videos. So all you're going to need is something to write on, paper, pencil, or you can choose to get a dry erase board, a marker, and then make sure you have something to write on, even if it's just a sock. So go ahead and hit the pause button, run and get that, and then I'll be waiting. All right, guys, so thanks. We are going to be talking about telling time correctly. All right. One thing I do want to review is when we've talked about which hand of the clock is the short hand. If you want to go ahead and shout it out to me and we'll see if you're right. The hour hand or the minute hand, which one is the short hand? If you said hour, you are correct because the hour hand has less letters, and that's how we remember that is the shorter hand, compared to the minute is a longer word. So if we're looking at our clock, we will notice that the hour hands are all the red hands. The blue hand is the minute hand because it is longer. One thing I do want to review, all the hours are in red, all the minute numbers are in blue. We have talked about the minute hand up at the 12. The standard for second grade is telling time to the nearest 5 minutes. So parents, if you're listening, always you can quiz your kid on telling time on one of these clocks to the nearest 5 minute. At school, I like to do something called a time check, and it's just I yell out time check, and they have to run to our clock, write down what time they think it is, and I do it 4 times throughout the day. And if you get all 4 right and turned into me, then you get a prize. So if you have any clock like that, I know it's hard because the digital clocks kind of are everywhere now, so it's a little bit harder. But one thing I do like to focus on is the minute hand. So right now I have, the hour hand. Right now I have it at exactly 7 o'clock. And 7 o'clock, what I want to show you is when the minute hand travels halfway around, so to 7:30, see how that hour hand then moves between the 7 and the 8 because it traveled halfway around the clock. And halfway around the clock, it has to move halfway in between the 7 and the 8. And that's where we see a lot of confusion on the hours. As you see, if it travels even more and getting closer from 7 o'clock to going to 8 o'clock, the hour hand gets closer and closer. And a lot of times what we see is students that like to call this, they get the minute hand correct by saying, oh yeah, it's 45 minutes. But they like to call this 8:45 because it kind of looks like it's at an 8. But we have to remember going back all the way, starting at 7. I want you to just watch this hour hand. Watch the hour hand as I move halfway around. 7:45. 7:55, how close it is to that 8. And now it's 8 o'clock. So that is the most common thing that I always see as far as time goes. We have to really take a look. Mrs. Patrick always says if it's in between 2 numbers, take the blank number. And go ahead and shout it out to me. Take the smaller number. If you said smaller number, kiss your brain. Good job. So we take the smaller number. And we always know that there's always rule breakers. And that only is if it's in between, let's see if I can wind this around. If it's in between, like it's 12 o'clock, now it's 12:30. If it's in between 2 numbers, 12 and 1, well, you're thinking, well, the smaller number is 1. That's the only rule breaker. If it's in between 12 and 1, you take the 12. But if it's in between 1 and 2, take the 1. If it's in between 5 and 6, hours 5. If it's in between 8 and 9, what's smaller, 8 or 9? 8. If it's in between 11 and 12, what's smaller? 11. One other thing that I think we'll do, because I'm going to go ahead and set up some times, and I want you to go ahead and be able to write them down on your piece of paper, and then we'll just check them and kind of go from there. So I want you to go ahead and split your paper, your dry erase board, into 4s. That's 1 hamburger cut and 1 hot dog cut down the middle. And then go ahead and put your, what are those 2 dots called for your hour and your minute? What are those 2 dots? Go ahead and shout it out. If you said colon, you are correct. And you could give yourself a pat on the back. Good job. All right, so go ahead and set that up. I'll show you what mine looks like. You're just going to put the colons in each box so that you have something for your hour and your minute. And that's what you're going to fill in on the clocks that I give you. So this way, this will give us some chances to practice telling some time. Go ahead and hit the pause button, and you can go ahead and complete that. All right, so now that you are done and you should have your paper, one thing I'm going to actually do too that might help you out, and you can do it if needed. I'm going to put an H and an M. That's Mrs. Patrick's favorite store, actually. I'm going to put hour and minute. Hour and minute. So that it's reminding me, if you have 2 colors, you can even get fancy and underline your hour with red and your minute with blue. We did a lot of that in class where I had you use a blue crayon and a red crayon to tell the time. So that's always an option, and you can pause me at any time that you need to do that. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and set the clock to a time, and I want you to write it down in the first box. Go ahead and write that number down. Remember, find the hour first. Look at the red hour hand. Write that down, and then look at the blue minute hand. And if you need more time than this, go ahead and pause it so you can look at the clock, write it down, and then come back to me. And I'm not going to give too much time because you can always hit that pause button when you're figuring it out. So if I'm looking at the hour hand, the 2 numbers that it would be between 4 and 5. It's mostly pointing at the 4, so this one's kind of easy. 4, and I'm starting right at my 12, and I'm counting like I'm counting 5 bushels of apples. We've done that in school. So 5, 10. This clock's easy because it's pointing right at the 10. So this first time is 4, 10. So if this is what you have written down for problem number 1, you are correct. What I always like to do is look at it, find the hour hand, focus on it, write it down so you don't forget it. That's another problem that we see often, is as we are going around and counting all the way, and let's say our minute hand's all the way at 55, and as you're counting all this, you lose track of what was your hour hand. Then you have to go back and think what was your hour hand to then find your minute hand again. Think of them as 2 separate numbers, and that you fill them in separately. All right, next one. Go ahead, take a look. Remember, you can hit the pause button at any time. Let's go ahead and focus on the hour hand. The hour hand is between the 6 and the 7. What's the smaller number? It looks like it's at the 7 because it's almost the next hour, which would be 7. So if I'm following my rule, take the smaller number. 6 is smaller than 7. So I would go ahead and write in 6 for my hour. And this is what I mean with breaking it up into parts. So I got my hour hand down, and now I can go back, take my clock, and go around to say 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. Now, you don't have to count by fives that whole entire way. If you know that halfway around the clock is already 30 minutes past, and then you want to count on from there. So you want to say, okay, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. If you know that 3/4 of the way around the clock is all the way to 45, and then jump from 45 to 50, you can. This is an easy clock to read because they already give you the numbers on the outside. Try finding a clock that doesn't have these numbers on the outside and just has the big red hour marks. You have to know that one of those big red numbers, they each stand for counting by fives. And that's when you truly know that you have mastered telling time. We're going to go ahead and give it 2 more times. I'm not going to tell you those 2 times. We're going to just look at the clock, write your number down, and then we're going to check them together. So go ahead and hit pause if you want to take a freeze of that screen. Look at your red hour hand. Look at your blue minute hand. All right, Mrs. Patrick's going to go ahead and write that one down. And last but not least, maybe I'll give you a little of a tricky one. There you go, and you can hit the pause button to freeze to look at it. All right, so let's see. Those last 2, let's see what we got right. The last 2, if you had 10, 20, you are correct. Our hour hands at the 10, 5, 10, 15, 20. And the last one, I did try to trick you a little. I did put it in between the 12 and the 1 because that's the only one that the 2 numbers you take the bigger number instead of the smaller number. And it is all the way over at 12:45. So this is what your 4 numbers should look like. If you want to freeze it, make sure you got it. That's all for today. I think it was a nice, quick little review. I want you to watch it, and I think I'll make another video of me giving you a whole bunch of clocks, showing you the clock, and then you writing it down, and then we'll check all the answers all together. So keep that in mind about the minute hand, the hour hand. The one thing I do want to say too is you can always take time to do minutes and hours and clocks with your family. And if you don't have that clock, you can make a clock, and it might be nice. So after this, after you finished with this and you go ahead and turn me off, I want you to draw a clock, and I want you to see if you can label the clock correctly. Just starting with your, putting your hours on here, and you can even do them outside the clock. But what I always suggest is do your 12, 3, 6, and 9. And you look at your clock like it is kind of cut in fourths. So when we're going to be talking about fractions coming up too. So it'd be broken into 4 parts. And then from there, take your clock, and I'm going to erase those marks that I did. And go ahead and try to fill that in. Put your circle in the middle. One thing I did start to talk about before we left, when you're doing your hours and your minutes, please make sure that your hour hands truly are hour hands, that they're shorter hour hands, and that your minute hands, wherever they may be once you make your clock, that your minute hands are truly your longer hands that go kind of all the way to that outside of the circle. Oftentimes we make our hour hand and our minute hand too close together, and we often see that they kind of mush together. Another great idea is using 2 different colors for hours and minute hands. So if you really want to take this above and beyond and you're working with a parent and they can help you out, try to make your own clock and then try to practice putting different hands of the clock on there. And one final reminder is I never say that you have to do the arrows. I think arrows could get a little tricky and make it a little messy. So your hour hands can just be like Mrs. Patrick drew. Little lines. They do not need an arrow on the end. I like mine nice and clean cut. I'm going to go ahead and make a video right after this, and I'll upload it on another day where we'll just practice our time. So we'll see how this goes. I want feedback from you. I want to tell me if you like it. And I didn't get any interruptions, so that was a win. Thanks, guys.